My name is Corin Andrews. I'm 28 years old and 3 months ago I woke up from a 3-week coma to complete silence. No father. No brothers. No flowers, no cards, not even a half-eaten snack on the visitor's chair. Just an empty hospital room and a single sheet of thick stationery on my bedside table, stamped with Andrews Residence, Greenwich, Connecticut across the top. Underneath was my father's handwriting. Karen, we've decided to stop covering your medical expenses. Your brothers agree it's time you handle things on your own. Good luck. Dad. I read it 4 times before it sank in and then I cried for an hour straight. But my father made one mistake. He forgot what my mother left behind, and he definitely forgot about the man in the gray suit who walked into my room on day 3. Before I continue, only if this story truly connects with you, take a second to like and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the beginning. To the house where I grew up and the family that taught me silence was the same thing as love. I'm an ICU nurse working night shifts at a mid-size hospital in Stamford, Connecticut. 12 hours on, 12 off. I live alone in a small 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a radiator that bangs at 2 in the morning. I pay my own rent, buy my own groceries, and drive a 9-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door I never fixed because there was always a more urgent bill waiting. My family lives just 26 minutes away in Greenwich, but it feels like another world. My father's house is a 5-bedroom colonial with a stone front, iron gates, a heated pool and a 3-car garage holding his Range Rover, my stepmother Diane's Mercedes and my brother Preston's BMW. The dining room has a custom walnut table that seats 12, yet every Sunday Diane sets only 4 places. Harold at the head, Diane beside him, Preston across, and sometimes my younger brother Grant if he's home. There was never a 5th chair. I stopped being surprised by that years ago. You can only show up uninvited to your own family dinner so many times before you understand you're not expected. The last time I tried, Diane smiled at the door and said, "Oh, Karen, we didn't know you were coming. Let me see if we have enough." 2 untouched ribeye steaks were sitting behind her on the counter. My father never even looked up from his phone. That was 3 years ago. After that, I stopped trying. Stopped calling on Sundays, stopped driving to Greenwich, stopped believing that if I were patient and helpful enough, they'd finally make space for me. But to understand why I kept trying for so long, you have to go back to when I was 12. My mother, Margaret Ellis Andrews, was gentle in a quiet way. She slipped notes into my lunchbox and remembered exactly how I liked my eggs. She came from money, the Ellis side, but she never made a big deal of it. What I remember most are Saturday mornings at the piano, her hands guiding mine through scales, and the thin gold Cartier watch her mother Eleanor gave her, which she never took off. On March 7th I had a small school piano recital. Nothing fancy, just 12 kids in a gym. But I had practiced for weeks because she promised she'd be in the front row, smiling the way only she could. My father said he'd pick me up at 8:30 that night, but he never showed. I waited in the school lobby for 45 minutes, calling his cell over and over, each time going straight to voicemail. Finally I called my mom. She had already been home for hours and assumed Dad had handled it. The second she realized I was alone, she said, "Stay inside, baby. I'm coming." It wasn't light rain. It was one of those heavy March storms in Connecticut that flood the roads and blur the headlights. She drove out anyway because her 12-year-old daughter was standing alone, and her husband wasn't answering his phone. He never made it. A pickup truck slid through a red light on Route 106 and hit her on the driver's side. She was pronounced dead at Stamford Hospital at 9:47 p.m. My father arrived about an hour later. I was still in my recital dress, sitting in a hallway chair with a paper cup of water. He didn't kneel. He didn't hug me. He just said, "Your mother drove out in that storm because of you." 3 days later at the funeral, my grandmother Eleanor held me close and whispered, "Your mother made sure you'd be taken care of." I didn't understand then. I was 12 and had just learned that needing someone could cost you everything. 2 years later, Diane Mercer entered our lives. She was polished and precise. Perfect hair, designer shoes, a smile that appeared just before her eyes caught up. The first time she came to dinner, she brought gifts and called me sweetie, saying I had my mother's cheekbones. Within 6 months she'd moved in. Within a year she married my father. Within 2 years, almost everything that belonged to my mother was gone. It happened slowly. First the photos. My mother's portrait above the fireplace replaced with a beach painting Diane bought in Nantucket. Then the piano. "We need the space for Preston's office," she told me gently. Then my bedroom. One afternoon I came home and my things had been moved to the attic room with slanted ceilings and no closet. Diane said it would give me privacy. Preston, her son from a previous marriage, was 4 years older and already in college, but my father treated him like the heir he'd always wanted. Preston will take over the business someday, he'd say proudly. He understands how the world works. That Christmas the family card featured 4 smiling faces. I wasn't in the picture. I was at a friend's house when they took it and no one thought to wait. When I was about 15 I asked my father if my mother had left behind any documents, any papers, accounts, anything at all. He put down his fork and gave me that cold, steady look that could silence an entire boardroom. Your mother didn't leave anything, Karen. She left debt. I took care of it. Don't bring her up again. You've done enough. After that, I never asked again. For 16 years I carried his words like a weight in my chest. Your mother drove out in that storm because of you. That sentence shaped my life. It's why I didn't fight when they moved me to the attic. Why I stayed quiet when the piano disappeared. Why I turned down a partial scholarship and chose a cheaper nursing program after my father said, "Nursing is fine for someone with your limitations. Don't waste resources." I believed him. When you're told at 12 that you caused the worst thing in your family's life, you spend years trying to make up for it. You don't argue. You don't set boundaries. You say thank you and accept whatever attention comes your way, convincing yourself that's what love is. That was my life until March 14th this year. I was driving home after a 12-hour ICU shift, close to midnight, exhausted in a way that sits behind your eyes. I didn't see the box truck run the red light on Elm Street until it filled my windshield. I don't remember the crash or the ambulance. I was told my heart stopped once in the year and they brought me back. The hospital called my father. He was still my emergency contact because I'd never changed it, some small part of me still believing he'd show up. He came once during the first week. My brother Grant later told me Dad stood in the doorway, looked at the machines keeping me alive and said, "This is going to be expensive," then left. Grant visited in week 2. No one came in week 3. Then I woke up to that note on heavy stationery cutting off my medical support. But here's what matters. A week before the accident, while cleaning out a box from my closet, I found a torn envelope I'd taken years earlier from the Greenwich attic. It had my name on it and the logo of a financial firm I didn't recognize. The letter inside was gone, just the ripped envelope. I tossed it aside thinking it was junk. I wish I'd looked closer. Waking from a coma isn't dramatic like on TV. It's slow and confusing. My throat burned from the breathing tube. My wrist was in a cast. My body felt heavy and stiff. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, and for a long time that was the only sound. No one holding my hand. No one calling my name. I turned my head with effort and saw the empty visitor's chair and a wilted bouquet of carnations from the hospital gift shop, still wrapped in dusty plastic. No one had touched them in days. No one ever explained anything to me. When I was about 15, I asked my father if my mother had left behind any papers or documents. He put down his fork, fixed me with that steady look that could silence a room and said, "Your mother didn't leave anything, Karen. She left debt. I handled it. Don't bring her up again." So I didn't. For 16 years I carried that sentence like a weight in my chest. I was told she drove away in that storm because of me, and that belief shaped every choice I made. I didn't argue when my bedroom was reassigned or when the piano disappeared. I turned down a partial scholarship to nursing school and chose a cheaper program after my father said nursing was suitable for someone with my limitations and that I shouldn't waste resources. I believed him. When you're told at 12 that you caused the worst thing that happened to your family, you spend your life trying to make up for it. You don't set boundaries. You don't ask hard questions. You say yes and thank you and accept whatever small scraps of approval come your way, convincing yourself that's what love is. That was my life until March 14th of this year. After a 12-hour ICU shift, exhausted in a way that settles behind your eyes, I didn't see the box truck run the red light until it filled my windshield. I don't remember the crash or the ambulance. I was later told my heart stopped once in the emergency room and they brought me back. My father was still listed as my emergency contact, a detail I'd never updated because some small part of me still believed he would come. He did come once during the first week. My brother Grant told me he stood in the doorway, looked at the machines and said, "This is going to be expensive," and then left. By the third week no one was visiting. A week before the accident, while sorting through old boxes from my apartment, I'd found a torn envelope from years ago with my name on it and a logo from a financial firm I didn't recognize. The letter inside was gone and I dismissed it as junk mail. I wish I had looked closer. Waking from a coma isn't dramatic like in movies. It's slow and foggy. My throat burned from the breathing tube, my wrist was in a cast and every joint ached. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the room was empty except for a wilted bouquet from the hospital gift shop, dusty and untouched. Then I saw the note on the table. It said they had decided to stop covering my medical expenses and that my brothers agreed it was time for me to handle things on my own. It was written on heavy cream stationery with our family name at the top, in my father's careful handwriting. I pressed the call button, and a nurse named Linda told me I'd been unconscious for 22 days. A woman had come a week earlier, signed paperwork to shift financial responsibility to me and brought the flowers. It was Diane. I cried not because they left but because I finally understood they had never truly been there. Memories surfaced, graduating at the top of my nursing class while my father texted a brief, "congrats," and didn't attend, standing alone in a parking lot taking a smiling photo by myself, being introduced at Thanksgiving as someone who helps out, while my brother was praised and gifted a new car. I kept returning for holidays and birthdays hoping for something different, because that 12-year-old part of me was still waiting. 2 days after waking I tried calling my family. My brother's number blocked my calls. My father's voicemail answered. When I reached the house, Diane picked up, her voice calm and controlled. "Karen, how are you feeling? We heard you were awake." I told her I had been in a coma for 3 weeks and nearly died. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and in that silence I realized I was finally seeing the truth clearly for the first time. Diane answered in that careful tone she uses when she wants you to feel unreasonable. She said they were glad I was okay, but that my father and she believed it was time for me to stand on my own. I was 28, she reminded me, and most people my age didn't depend on family to pay medical bills. I told her they had signed papers transferring my hospital debt to me while I was unconscious. She replied that they were simply helping me grow and that I couldn't lean on my father forever. My cast ached as I gripped the phone and asked if this was what she called growth. Her voice cooled as she mentioned Preston's wedding in 3 months and my father's important business deal, saying it wasn't a good time for drama. Then she added that they had already told the family I chose to go my own way and that everyone understood. She hung up, and just like that the story had been rewritten, so I was the one who walked away. The numbers were overwhelming. 3 weeks in ICU, emergency spleen surgery, a fractured wrist, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild brain injury brought the total bill to more than $187,000. Insurance covered part of it, but I still owed about $43,000. My savings held $6,200. I couldn't work for at least 8 weeks, my car was totaled, my lease was ending soon, and I had no cushion left. I lay there in a hospital gown, scrolling through financial aid forms on a cracked phone, realizing my only support had been a fading bouquet from someone who signed away responsibility in my absence. I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about my mother and the story I'd carried for 16 years, that she left nothing and that I was to blame. I read my father's note one last time, folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer and said aloud, "Enough." I didn't know how I would fix any of it, but I knew I was finished trying to earn love that never truly existed. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, a man I had never seen before knocked on my hospital room door, and everything began to shift in a way I couldn't have imagined. Before I tell you about the man who knocked on my door, you need to understand what my father was doing while I was lying there trying to figure out how to survive. He was shaping the story. Wednesday morning my phone buzzed with a message from my Aunt Claire, his sister whom I had barely seen in years. She said she was disappointed in me after everything my father had done. I had no idea what she meant until a college friend forwarded me an email asking if it was real because it didn't sound like me. The email had gone out from my father's personal account to dozens of relatives, colleagues, and friends. The subject line read, "A difficult family update." In it, he claimed I had wasted every opportunity, refused to take responsibility for my life, and blamed the family for my own decisions. He wrote that after years of support they were stepping back for my own good. And then he added the line that made my stomach drop. Her mother would be ashamed. I was lying in a hospital bed when he sent that to everyone we knew. Diane added her part more quietly, posting in the private family group that they had tried everything and sometimes you have to let someone fall so they can learn. ending with a prayer and a heart emoji. Within hours, messages poured in from people who had already accepted his version. They expressed sympathy for him and hoped I would get help. No one asked what had actually happened. In their eyes he was the respected patriarch and I was simply the difficult daughter. Thursday morning Preston called. I almost let it ring, but part of me still hoped for something different. He didn't ask how I was. He said our father was being generous and could have demanded repayment for everything he'd spent on me, but was choosing not to, and that I should see it as a gift. When I reminded him I had just come out of a coma, he brushed it aside and said I was fine now. He told me to sign the release Diane had sent so we could all move on. A courier had delivered that legal packet 2 days earlier, asking me to waive any and all claims to Andrew's family assets and holdings. I had read it twice, confused. If my mother had left nothing and my father had settled her debts, what exactly was I giving up? When I asked Preston, there was a pause. He said it was just a formality, that Dad was reorganizing the estate and cleaning up old trusts for a new deal. I told him I wasn't signing anything I didn't understand. He tried again, urging me not to make it difficult. I said no, and for the first time in my life I didn't soften it. He hung up and I sat there holding my cracked phone. For the first time in 16 years I didn't feel guilty. I felt suspicious. If I supposedly had nothing, why did they need my signature to prove it? The next day Diane came in person, dressed perfectly as always in a cream coat and leather gloves, carrying white tulips. At the nurse's station she was all warmth and grace, the picture of concern. But once the door closed, the smile disappeared. She told me I was making things difficult and reminded me that my father's biggest business deal was closing in 6 weeks. If I caused problems, she said softly, he had connections at hospitals all over the region, board members, donors, people who could make my nursing career vanish with a single conversation. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calm and precise, the way she used to inform me that my room was being moved upstairs. I asked again what I was signing away. If my mother left nothing, why did he need my consent? For a split second she hesitated and mentioned the trust company before catching herself and calling it simple paperwork. That slip told me more than anything else. I said I wouldn't sign something I didn't understand and that I was done being afraid. At the door she told me I was never as smart as I thought I was, then left as quietly as she'd arrived. But I had heard what I needed to hear. Trust company. Suddenly the torn envelope I'd once found and the vague family whispers from years ago didn't feel random anymore. The days that followed were heavy. My portion of the hospital bill, $43,000, sat on the tray table beside my bed. My savings were just over $6,000. I arranged a payment plan I couldn't really afford just to keep collectors away. My lease was ending, my car was gone, and my income was paused while I healed. I filled out financial assistance forms late at night under buzzing lights, trying to stretch every dollar in my head. Meanwhile, my father's email kept doing its damage. Messages trickled in from people who assumed I had serious personal problems because of the way he had carefully hinted at choices and patterns. He knew how to suggest something without ever saying it outright. At 3 a.m, listening to distant monitors and the hum of the building, I thought about my mother. For years I had believed I owed a debt for something that wasn't mine to carry. And lying there, it finally occurred to me that maybe I had been paying for a story someone else had written all along. 16 years of apologizing for a storm I didn't cause. I was 28, lying in a hospital bed, believing I had nothing left. But that wasn't entirely true. I had a question now, and that question felt powerful. Late Tuesday night my brother Grant called from an unfamiliar number. He spoke quickly, almost in a whisper, saying he was using a friend's phone because our father had put some kind of tracker on his line. He was scared our father would know he had contacted me. I asked if he was okay and he admitted he should have told me something years ago but hadn't because he was afraid. Before our grandmother Eleanor passed away, she told him that our mother had left something for me. Something significant, that Dad was supposed to give me when I turned 25. I was 28 now. 3 years had gone by. Grant said he once found documents in Dad's locked desk drawer from a trust company, maybe called Hartfield or something similar. When Dad caught him looking, he grabbed Grant's arm hard enough to bruise and warned him never to mention our mother's papers again. Grant's voice shook as he told me this, and before he hung up he whispered that he was sorry for waiting so long. That call changed everything. I lay awake searching every variation of the name I could think of until I found it. Hartfield Trust and Fiduciary Services in Hartford, Connecticut. The logo matched the torn envelope I'd once dismissed. At exactly 9:01 the next morning I called. I explained my name and said I believed there might be a trust in it, though I didn't have details. After a pause and the sound of typing, the receptionist's tone shifted and she transferred me to a senior trustee. The man introduced himself as Richard Calloway and said he was the managing trustee of the Margaret Ellis Andrews Irrevocable Trust. He told me they had been trying to reach me for 3 years and had sent certified letters to the address on file, my father's home in Greenwich, multiple times. As he spoke, the weight I had carried for 16 years began to crack. The story I'd been told about my mother leaving nothing was unraveling, thread by thread, and for the first time I realized the truth had been sitting behind a locked drawer all along. Each letter was signed for and accepted, Mr. Calloway explained over the phone, but you never responded. I began to think you didn't wish to be found. My voice barely worked when I asked who had signed for them. I heard papers shuffle. The signature reads Diane Andrews. Every time. The room seemed to tilt and I gripped the bed rail to steady myself. I told him I needed to know everything. He answered gently that my mother had anticipated this possibility, which was exactly why she made the trust irrevocable. 2 days later, Richard Calloway walked into my hospital room carrying a worn brown leather briefcase. With him was a younger man in a navy suit who introduced himself as Thomas Whitfield, a senior fiduciary officer with Hartfield Trust. They were calm, professional, and unlike my family, careful with their words. Mr. Calloway took the visitor chair and opened his case with a quiet courtesy that felt almost foreign to me. He explained that my mother, Margaret Ellis Andrews, had established an irrevocable trust in 2008, 2 years before she passed away. I was the sole beneficiary. The trust had been funded by my maternal grandmother and held 2 primary assets. The first was an investment account now valued at approximately $2.1 million. I forgot to breathe. The second was the property at 14 Edgewater Lane in Greenwich. I stared at him and said that was my father's house. He calmly corrected me. My mother had purchased the home before her marriage using her inheritance, and a prenuptial agreement kept it separate property. When she died, the house transferred into the trust. My father had been living there for 16 years, but he had never owned it. Then they placed 3 certified mail receipts on the tray table, each signed by Diane. The documents lay in front of me like pieces of a hidden history. My mother's signature appeared at the bottom of the trust papers, with small handwritten notes in the margins. I traced the ink with my finger. She had known. She had prepared for this. Mr. Calloway explained that she had been deliberate and clear that her daughter would be protected no matter what happened. I remembered my grandmother leaning close at the funeral and whispering that my mother had made sure I would be taken care of. At 12 years old I had misunderstood what that meant. Now lying there I finally understood. The tears that came weren't from fear or exhaustion but from relief. After 16 years of believing I was the burden, I learned that my mother had never seen me that way. She had loved me enough to plan for a future she might not be there to witness. And in that hospital room for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I cried because my father had hidden the truth from me for years, and because I had spent 16 years apologizing for taking up space in a house that was legally mine. Calloway and Whitfield didn't interrupt. They simply waited. When I finally wiped my face with my good hand, Calloway asked gently, "What would you like to do?" I looked at the deed, the trust documents, and the certified mail receipts signed by Diane. "I want what's mine," I said. "And I want him to hear it from me." Calloway then pulled an ivory envelope from his briefcase. It was an invitation to the Andrews Foundation Charity Gala, where my father was set to be honored. He explained the situation plainly. My father had used the Greenwich property, the one held in my trust, as collateral for a $4.5 million commercial development loan. He had presented it as his asset, even though he had never legally owned it. If the lender, First Capital Regional, discovered the truth, the loan could be voided and the deal would collapse. Legally, I had 2 clear options: formally notify the lender that the property was held in trust and never available as collateral, and petition to transfer full operational control of the trust to me, which should have happened when I turned 25. Both were straightforward steps. The question was timing. I didn't want drama, but I also didn't want quiet letters my father could intercept or legal maneuvers he could stall for months. I wanted the truth spoken in the very room where he usually controlled the narrative. Calloway considered that and told me the gala was in 12 days. The loan announcement was scheduled for that same evening, and representatives from the bank would be present. He placed the deed on top of the stack so I could clearly see the county seal, the date, 2004, 2 years before my parents' marriage, and my mother's name printed in clean, undeniable type. Your mother prepared the shield, he said. You just have to decide when to raise it. I was discharged that Thursday. Grant helped quietly, booking me a room at a small hotel in Hartford using his own card and texting the confirmation from a prepaid phone. We didn't even comment on how strange it was that, as adults, we were still moving carefully around our father. The hotel room was modest but peaceful. A simple bed, a small coffee maker, a window overlooking a parking lot. For the first time in weeks I was somewhere no one controlled but me. I sat on the edge of that bed, trust documents in my bag, and realized that for once I wasn't reacting to their story. I was preparing to tell my own place for generations, he said, and I am proud to honor my family's vision while expanding opportunities for the community. The crowd clapped politely, some even cheering, while I stayed near the doorway, listening and measuring my moment. Every word he said, every gesture, every bow, it was all built on something that wasn't his to claim. My hands tightened on the strap of my bag. The trust deed, the investment account, every piece of evidence I had. It all gave me control now that I waited for the perfect pause, the moment when he would smile at the applause, when the room believed in his version of the story. That was my cue. I stepped forward, letting my presence draw attention without shouting, moving slowly toward the stage. Each step felt like reclaiming years of silence, of being overlooked, of being erased. I wasn't here to attack. I was here to make the truth undeniable. From the edge of the stage I caught Diane's eyes. Her carefully composed smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. Preston stiffened, sensing that something was off. The room, filled with the wealthy and influential of Greenwich, continued its chatter, unaware that the narrative was about to shift. I straightened my shoulders, took a breath I didn't know I had left, and spoke. Not as the ignored daughter, not as the apologetic child, but as the rightful owner of what had always belonged to me. I could feel the room holding its breath. All those chandeliers, the crystal glasses, the low hum of conversation, it all seemed to fade. My father's eyes flicked to me, then to the witnesses at the table, then back to me, searching for the daughter he thought he'd silenced forever. I stood my ground, ribs aching, voice steady. You spent years pretending this was yours, Dad, I said. But it's not. Everything in that trust, the house, the investments, they were my mother's and they belonged to me. A ripple of shock ran through the ballroom. Forks paused midair. Conversations stuttered and died. Diane's carefully composed mask cracked just enough for the edges of panic to show. Harold's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Calloway and Whitfield flanked me, silent pillars of calm, letting the facts speak for themselves. Then Calloway added, firm and precise, Mr. Andrews, your daughter is the rightful beneficiary. The trust was irrevocable and your knowledge of it does not change that. You have misrepresented ownership of property and assets for years, and it stops today. The hush that followed was complete. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Harold's public smile vanished. He glanced at Diane, who tried to shrink into the crowd, then back at me. For the first time I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Not the usual calculation, not the poised authority he wielded like a weapon, but real human fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room knew. The truth was finally standing in the center of it, and this time it wasn't going anywhere. The ballroom felt frozen. Harold's voice wavered as he tried to regain control. My late wife didn't have a trust. Whatever this woman has told you, she's mistaken, or misled. He called me this woman in front of 200 people. Calloway didn't flinch. He calmly set his briefcase on a table near crystal glasses and bread plates, and laid out 3 documents in a perfect line. This, he said, is the original trust instrument, signed by Margaret Ellis Andrews and notarized October 14, 2008. This is the property deed for 14 Edgewater Lane, recorded March 21, 2004, 2 years before your marriage. And these are 3 certified mail receipts, all sent to that address for your daughter, each signed by Diane Andrews. The room fell so silent I could hear ice melting in glasses. Harold glanced at the papers, and for a fraction of a second his expression shifted, from contempt to recognition. He knew. He'd known all along. At a VIP table, a tall man in a dark suit stood. Harold Hargrove, senior officer at First Capital Regional, the bank backing Harold's $4.5 million development deal. He walked toward us. Is the property you submitted as collateral the same as these documents reference? Harold's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. Preston leaned forward, confused. Dad, what's going on? Harold stammered. That house is mine. Calloway's voice cut quietly but firmly through the room. Living in a home and owning it are very different things, Mr. Andrews. A subtle murmur went through the crowd. Chairs shifted, phones peeked from under tables, eyes narrowed. 200 people silently recalculating everything they thought they knew about Harold Andrews. Hargrove stopped beside us, face calm but sharp. If the property you pledged is in an irrevocable trust and was never legally yours to offer, we cannot proceed. The deal is suspended, effective immediately. Our legal team will follow up Monday. Harold's face drained of all color, white. He tried to speak. Robert, listen to me. Hargrove raised a hand, straightened his cuffs and said, I've heard enough tonight. I'd suggest you talk to your lawyer before you speak to me again, Harold said, then walked back to his table, grabbed his coat and left the ballroom without a backward glance. That's when Diane's voice cut through the air, sharp and raw in a way I'd never heard before. You told me the house was yours. You said the papers were taken care of. You told me there was nothing to worry about, she accused, her tone stripping away every trace of calm she usually wore. Harold tried to calm her. Diane, not now. I signed those letters because you told me to. You said it was old, unimportant paperwork. Diane, stop. But it was too late. In front of 200 people, she had just admitted that Harold had ordered her to intercept my mail. The room didn't gasp, it froze. I watched from the back as everything my father had built for show and control shattered before everyone's eyes. I could have stopped there. The house truth was out, the gala audience had seen it, and Calloway had everything he needed. But I had one more card to play. The police accident report I'd kept tucked in my blazer since that night alone in the Hampton Inn 3 nights ago. I held it up and said, there's more. Harold's eyes finally betrayed fear. The first real fear of the night, not his usual controlled act, but the kind that comes when the lie you've built your life on is about to collapse. My hands were steady. I'd rehearsed this for 16 years. You told me my mother died because of me. You said she drove into that storm because of my call. You let me carry that burden for years, used it, repeated it whenever I questioned you. I said, my voice firm. The room was utterly silent. The police report says otherwise. It shows that you, Harold Andrews, agreed to pick me up from my school recital at 8:30. It shows my mother called you 5 times between 8:45 and 9:10. You never answered because you were at a poker game on Fairfield Avenue and had turned off your phone. Mom didn't drive into the storm because of me. You didn't show up, and then you blamed a 12-year-old girl to cover your own guilt. Harold opened his mouth but no sound came out. Behind him, Grant stared at the floor, tears streaming, while Preston froze, hand pressed flat against the tablecloth as if it held him upright. I didn't ask for an apology. I'd stopped expecting one years ago. The lie ends tonight, I said. Then something I never expected happened. Grant, who had been quietly present all evening, invisible and obedient, slowly pushed his chair back, wiped his face and walked away from our father's table toward me. Every head in the room turned as the second son, the one who had never challenged Harold before, finally made his move. Grant stopped in front of me, his voice breaking on the first word, and I could see the weight of everything he'd carried. I knew, he said, not just to me but to everyone in the room. Not everything but enough. I knew Dad was hiding papers. I knew something was wrong with the way he spoke about Mom, and I was too scared to speak up. His eyes were red and he whispered, I should have been braver. I should have been the brother you needed. Harold's voice cut through sharply. Grant, sit down. But my brother didn't. Quietly, firmly he said, no, Dad. I'm done sitting down. Diane reached for him, possessive and instinctive, but he pulled away. You intercepted her mail, Diane. Don't touch me. Grant stood beside me, silently, a steady presence that spoke louder than words. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't alone in a room full of people who had ignored me. A few guests in the back started to notice. Some laid down their napkins. One couple walked over, then another, maybe 10 people in total, enough to feel like a shift. Harold finally sat. Not with flair or gesture, just quietly at a nearby table, perfectly pressed suit, hair in place, but something behind his eyes had gone dark, a quiet acknowledgement of his loss of control. Diane had already left through the service exit, her heels clicking, not looking back, and Preston followed seconds later, phone to his ear. Calloway spoke briefly to one of the bank representatives and handed over a card. My office will file all documentation with First Capital on Monday. County records are public. Quiet, professional, final. I looked at my father, alone at a table for 10, champagne still untouched, programs still in front of him, reading, Honoring Harold Andrews, A Legacy of Leadership. I thought of saying something final, something to end 28 years of silence and guilt, but there was nothing left. I turned and walked out with Grant, the ballroom murmuring again, retelling the story in real time. I didn't feel triumph, only quiet, like the calm after a storm. In the 3 months after that night, Calloway filed the formal trust transfer petition the following Monday. Because the trust was irrevocable and I was the named beneficiary, the process was straightforward, only slowed by the mountains of paperwork Harold's attorneys tried to throw in the way. They requested 2 extensions, but it was ultimately resolved without dispute. The courts rejected all of Harold's attempts to block me, and by early June, I had full control of the trust assets, the investment account, which had grown steadily to $2.13 million, and the deed to 14 Edgewater Lane. Harold was formally told that his continued residence depended entirely on me, the beneficiary, and I gave him 30 days to leave, a lot more than he ever gave me. First Capital Regional canceled his $4.5 million development loan, and their legal team referred his file to the state attorney general for potential mortgage fraud. His lawyers warned him to settle before things got worse, and I was told his legal fees alone could top $200,000. Diane filed for divorce in mid-May, claiming irreconcilable differences, but the timing spoke for itself. When the money vanished, so did she. Preston called once, I didn't answer. His 4-minute voicemail, full of pauses and throat clearing, was more about positioning than apology. The Andrews Foundation Gala wasn't held the next year. No one stepped up to organize it. I sold the Greenwich house in July. Some might find it strange, a $3.2 million childhood home, but that house held more shadows than memories. Every hallway, every floorboard, every quiet corner carried years of being unseen. I didn't need a mansion. I needed a life that was mine. I found a bright apartment in West Hartford with 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and sunlight flooding the living room. Climbing the 3 flights of stairs hurt my ribs at first, but I didn't care. Signing the lease in my own name, I stood in the empty space and just breathed for a full minute. I returned to nursing at a new hospital, with a fresh team and a badge that reads only C. Andrews, RN. Nobody there knows about the gala, the trust, or the Greenwich house. They only know me as the nurse who handles emergencies well and brings banana bread to staff meetings, and that's enough. Grant and I meet for dinner every Thursday at a simple Italian spot near his apartment. Red checkered tablecloths, candles, and bottles of wine. No pretenses. We talk about real things now, hard things, not the careful, measured conversations we used to have while Harold monitored every word. Grant started therapy in April, and for the first time I see him truly beginning to heal. That I started my new job in May. On my bookshelf, next to a small jade plant and a stack of novels I've been meaning to read, sits a simple silver frame holding a photo of my mother. She's laughing, holding me as a baby, her Cartier watch sparkling in the light. For the first time in 16 years, I don't feel guilt when I look at her. I feel gratitude. I spent so long apologizing for existing, believing my father's version of the story, that I caused my mother's death, that I deserved less, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps came my way. I built my whole identity around being sorry. The day I stopped apologizing was the day I started living. If you're still here listening, thank you. Not just for watching, but for listening. I don't know what your note on the nightstand looks like. Maybe a message ignored, a door left closed, or silence that felt normal after too long. I don't know your story, but I know this. You are not the story someone else wrote about you. You are not the names they called you, the seat they skipped for you, or the letters they intercepted. I didn't win because I was louder or smarter, and I didn't storm in with a perfect plan. I won because my mother planned ahead, and because one morning in a hospital bed holding a note that said, "Good luck," I decided I was done being sorry. She left me more than money, she left me proof that someone believed I was worth protecting, and that was enough for me to start believing it too. My name is Karen Andrews. I grew up in a house that was mine, raised by a mother who quietly made sure I would always have what I needed, and a father who tried to erase me. Now for the first time that name belongs to me. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a sister, a daughter, a friend waiting for someone who never showed, share it with them. There are more stories in the description that you might connect with. Thank you for being here, and if you want to follow my journey, please subscribe to my channel.